I never thought a day like this would change my life forever. I'm just a mechanic, hands calloused from years of wrenching, clothes perpetually stained with grease, and pockets always empty. My name is Leo, and I run a small, barely there garage on the outskirts of town. It's not much, but it keeps me alive. Or so I thought. It was one of those days when the sun seemed to have given up halfway through its journey across the sky. Gray clouds loomed overhead, threatening rain, as I drove my old tow truck down an abandoned stretch of highway. This road wasn't exactly known for being busy. It was more like the kind of place where you'd expect tumbleweeds to roll by if there weren't already puddles forming from last night's storm. My phone buzzed in the cup holder beside me. A text message from dispatch. Broken down vehicle reported near mile marker 47. Can you check it out? Of course, I muttered under my breath, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Because who else is gonna answer that call? Mile marker 47 was deep into nowhere land. A desolate stretch of asphalt surrounded by nothing but trees, rocks, and silence. As I approached, I spotted her car, a sleek black sedan, clearly expensive, sitting motionless at the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked rhythmically, cutting through the gloom like a heartbeat. A woman stood beside it, arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring off into the distance. She looked lost, vulnerable. Not something you'd expect from someone driving such a fancy car. I pulled up behind her, tires crunching against gravel, and stepped out. The cold wind bit at my face as I walked toward her, toolbox in hand. Hey, I called out, trying to sound friendly despite the dreary weather. Need some help? She turned to look at me, and for a moment, our eyes locked. Hers were sharp, intelligent, but also tired, weighed down by something I couldn't quite place. She nodded slowly, almost hesitantly. Yes, thank you, she said, her voice soft yet firm. It just stopped working. That's how it all began. The moment when my ordinary, predictable world collided with hers. Little did I know, this encounter would unravel secrets, challenge everything I believed about myself, and leave me utterly speechless. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, I had a car to fix, and maybe, just maybe, a person to save. The woman introduced herself as Evelyn, though she didn't offer a last name. She seemed guarded, like someone who'd learned to keep parts of herself hidden from the world. I didn't push. It wasn't my place. Instead, I focused on what I did best, fixing things. Pop the hood, I said, nodding toward the front of her car. She hesitated for a second before pressing a button on her key fob. The hood released with a soft click, and I lifted it carefully, revealing the engine beneath. It was pristine, spotless, even. Whoever owned this car clearly spared no expense in maintaining it. But something was wrong. The faint smell of burnt rubber hung in the air, and one of the belts looked frayed. I leaned in closer, inspecting the damage. I murmured, running my fingers along the edges of the serpentine belt. Looks like your timing belt's gone bad. Could have snapped or slipped off entirely. Lucky you stopped when you did. Keep going, and you might have blown the whole engine. Evelyn's face paled slightly at that. Is it expensive to fix? She asked, her voice tinged with worry. I shrugged, trying to sound reassuring. Not too bad. If I had the right tools here, I could probably patch it up enough to get you to a shop. But we're kinda stuck out in the middle of nowhere. I glanced around pointedly. Trees swayed ominously in the wind, and the road stretched endlessly in both directions, empty save for us. You got any idea how long you've been sitting here? She shook her head. About 20 minutes? Maybe longer. I lost track of time. Her gaze drifted away from me, toward the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering faster now. Rain was coming, and soon. Well, don't worry, I said, forcing a grin. I'll figure something out. Just give me a sec. As I rummaged through my toolbox, pulling out wrenches and screwdrivers, I couldn't help but notice how quiet she was. Most people in her situation would be panicking, or at least complaining about the inconvenience. But Evelyn just stood there, watching me work with an unreadable expression. Every so often, she'd glance down at her phone, only to sigh quietly when she saw there was still no signal. You don't strike me as the type to drive out here alone, I remarked casually, trying to break the tension. What brings you to this neck of the woods? She hesitated again, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something, but thought better of it. Finally, she replied, business. Personal matters. Let's leave it at that. Her tone was polite but firm, a clear indication that she didn't want to elaborate. Fair enough. I wasn't exactly itching to share my life story either. Still, there was something about her demeanor that intrigued me. Beneath the polished exterior and composed facade, I sensed a vulnerability, a weight she carried silently. After about 10 minutes of tinkering, I managed to jury-rig a temporary fix for the timing belt. All right, I announced, wiping my hands on a rack. It's not perfect, but it should hold until we can get you somewhere safer. My garage isn't far from here, maybe 30 minutes if we take it slow. You okay with that? Evelyn nodded, relief flickering across her features. Thank you, she said sincerely. I really appreciate it. No problem, I replied, giving her a small smile. Hop in the tow truck. We'll get you sorted. As she climbed into the passenger seat, I caught another glimpse of her profile. There was something regal about the way she carried herself, like she belonged in a boardroom rather than a beat-up old tow truck. But there was also sadness in her eyes, a quiet ache that made me wonder what kind of personal matters had brought her to this deserted road. Little did I know, the answers to those questions would come sooner, and in ways more unexpected than I ever could have imagined. The ride back to my garage was awkward, to say the least. Evelyn sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while I navigated the narrow, winding road. The rain had started. A light drizzle at first, but it quickly turned into a steady downpour, pelting the windshield and forcing me to slow down even further. So, I said after a few minutes of silence, partly to fill the void and partly because I was genuinely curious. What kind of business brings you out here? If you don't mind me asking. She glanced at me briefly before looking away, her gaze fixed on the blurry landscape outside. It's complicated, she replied softly. Let's just say, sometimes, people need space to think, to breathe. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I nodded slowly, sensing that pressing her for details wouldn't do much good. Some stories aren't meant to be told right away, if at all. The tow truck rattled and groaned as we drove, its suspension protesting every bump in the road. I winced inwardly, hoping it wouldn't break down too. That would have been the cherry on top of this already strange day. You must see a lot of broken-down cars, Evelyn said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her tone was lighter now, almost conversational. Do most of your customers end up stranded like I was? I chuckled dryly. Yeah, pretty much. Most folks don't realize how fragile these machines are until they stop working. Then they're stuck relying on guys like me to bail them out. And yet, you seem happy doing it, she observed, turning to look at me again. There was something probing in her gaze, like she was trying to understand what made me tick. Happy? I repeated, raising an eyebrow. Not exactly. It pays the bills, sure, but happiness isn't really part of the equation. More like survival. Her expression softened, and for a moment, I thought she might say something else. But then she looked away, her attention returning to the rain-soaked world outside. We drove on in silence after that, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers providing a hypnotic backdrop to my thoughts. Who was this woman? She didn't fit the mold of someone who'd find herself stranded on a deserted highway. Everything about her, from her tailored clothes to her composed demeanor, screamed wealth and power. And yet, there was an underlying fragility, a sense that she was carrying burdens far heavier than a broken-down car. When we finally arrived at my garage, the sight of the ramshackle building seemed to take Evelyn by surprise. It wasn't much to look at. A creaky wooden sign hung crookedly above the entrance, advertising Leo's Auto Repair in faded letters. The parking lot was uneven, filled with potholes, and the interior smelled faintly of oil and rust. "This is it?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's humble," I admitted, shrugging as I parked the tow truck, "but it gets the job done." To her credit, Evelyn didn't complain. Instead, she stepped out of the vehicle and followed me inside, where I led her to a small waiting area cluttered with old magazines and mismatched furniture. "Make yourself comfortable," I told her. This shouldn't take long. As I rolled up my sleeves and got to work on her car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something unusual was unfolding. Evelyn lingered nearby, occasionally peeking over my shoulder to watch as I replaced the damaged timing belt with a spare from my inventory. At one point, she offered to help, which caught me off guard. You don't have to stay here, I said, gesturing toward the waiting room. You'll probably be more comfortable. No, she interrupted firmly. I want to see how it's done, if that's all right with you. Her request threw me for a loop. Most people avoided getting their hands dirty, or even watching the process, but Evelyn seemed genuinely interested. So I let her stay, explaining each step as I went along. To my surprise, she listened intently, asking thoughtful questions that showed she wasn't just humoring me. By the time I finished, the rain had eased up, leaving behind a damp, earthy scent in the air. I wiped my hands on a rag and turned to face her. All set, I announced. She should run smoothly now. Just make sure to get the belt replaced properly soon. It's only a temporary fix. Evelyn smiled. A real smile this time, warm and genuine. Thank you, Leo. I mean it. You've been incredibly kind. Her gratitude caught me off guard. It's my job, I replied, brushing it off. Anyone else would have done the same. But Evelyn shook her head. No, they wouldn't. Not everyone goes out of their way like you did today. Her words lingered in my mind as I walked her back to her car. Something about the way she said them made me feel seen. Like she understood things about me that I hadn't even realized myself. And then came the moment that changed everything. As she climbed into the driver's seat, she reached into her purse and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. My stomach sank. I knew what was coming next. People like her always tipped generously, and while I appreciated the gesture, it also reminded me of the gap between us. The mechanic and the wealthy stranger. But instead of handing me cash, she pulled out a business card and held it out to me. Confused, I took it and glanced down at the elegant script printed on the front. Evelyn Hartwell, CEO, Hartwell Industries. My jaw dropped. Wait, you're the Evelyn Hartwell? As in, the CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the country? She nodded, her lips curving into a faint smile. Guilty as charged. I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at the card in my hand. All this time, I've been helping someone whose name I'd seen in headlines and on billboards. Someone who could buy my entire garage, and probably the town it was in, without blinking an eye. Before I could stammer out a coherent response, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto mine. Leo, she said, her voice steady and serious, I owe you more than just a thank you. Meet me tomorrow morning at Hartwell Tower downtown. Suite 47. We need to talk. With that, she started the engine, gave me one last enigmatic look, and drove off, leaving me standing in the middle of my crumbling garage, clutching her business card like it was a lifeline. What had I gotten myself into? That night, I couldn't sleep. Evelyn's business card sat on the kitchen table, illuminated by the dim light of a flickering bulb above me. I stared at it like it might suddenly sprout wings and fly away, or maybe explode in my face. Either option felt equally plausible. Suite 47. Hartwell Tower. The CEO of one of the biggest tech companies in the country wanted to talk to me? About what? Did she think I was some kind of miracle worker because I fixed her car? Or worse, was this some sort of prank? Maybe she'd mistaken me for someone else entirely. I shook my head, trying to clear the fog of paranoia creeping into my mind. No, that didn't make sense. She knew exactly who I was. She'd watched me work, asked questions, thanked me sincerely. There was no mistaking the sincerity in her voice when she said we needed to talk. But still, why? The more I thought about it, the more knots formed in my stomach. This wasn't just unusual, it was surreal. People like Evelyn Hartwell didn't randomly invite mechanics to their corporate headquarters for chats over coffee. They had assistants for that. Entire teams of people whose sole job was to handle situations like this. So why me? My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me out of my spiraling thoughts. It was a text from my buddy Mike, who ran a diner down the street. Hey man, you alive? Haven't seen you since yesterday. Everything cool? I hesitated before typing back. Yeah, everything's fine. Just weird day. Mike replied almost instantly. Weird how? You fixing cars for aliens now or something? I laughed despite myself. If only he knew. Not aliens. Just someone important. Can't explain right now. There was a pause before his next message came through. Important, huh? Like, hot important? Or rich important? Both, I typed back. And then some. Mike's response was predictable. Dude, spill the beans. What happened? But I didn't answer. How could I? Even if I tried to explain, it wouldn't sound real, not even to him. Instead, I set my phone aside and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving behind an eerie quiet that made the world feel smaller somehow. Like the universe had paused, waiting to see what I'd do next. What was I going to do? Show up at Hartwell Tower tomorrow morning? Walk into a skyscraper filled with suits and security guards, all while wearing my grease-stained coveralls? Yeah, that would go over well. I imagined the receptionist looking me up and down, raising an eyebrow before calling security to escort me out. Or worse, Evelyn herself showing up, realizing she'd made a mistake, and apologizing profusely for wasting my time. And yet, deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore her invitation. Something about the way she'd looked at me earlier, the intensity in her eyes, the weight of her words, told me this wasn't a casual request. Whatever she wanted to discuss, it mattered. To her, at least. So I decided I'd go. Not because I expected anything to come of it, but because I owed it to myself to find out what she wanted. Besides, curiosity was eating me alive. If nothing else, I figured it would make for a good story to tell Mike later. The next morning, I woke up early, earlier than usual, and spent an embarrassing amount of time debating what to wear. My usual mechanic attire wasn't going to cut it, but I didn't exactly own a suit either. After rummaging through my closet, I settled on a pair of clean jeans and a button-up shirt I'd bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best I could do. As I drove toward downtown, the city skyline loomed larger with each passing mile. Hartwell Tower stood out among the other buildings, a gleaming glass monolith that seemed to pierce the clouds. Just looking at it made my palms sweat. What was I walking into? When I arrived, the lobby was every bit as intimidating as I'd imagined. Polished marble floors reflected the sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and sleek leather couches lined the walls. A massive chandelier hung overhead, casting prismatic rainbows across the room. And then there were the people, men and women in tailored suits, chatting animatedly or tapping away on laptops, completely oblivious to the scruffy guy standing awkwardly near the entrance. I approached the front desk, clutching Evelyn's business card like a lifeline. Hi, I stammered, feeling ridiculously out of place. I'm here to see Evelyn Hartwell. She, told me to come to Suite 47. The receptionist, a sharply dressed woman with an earpiece and an air of practiced professionalism, raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. Name? She asked, her tone clipped. Leo Martinez. She typed something into her computer, nodded once, and pressed a button on her headset. Miss Hartwell, your guest has arrived. Pause. Then, turning back to me, take the elevator to the 47th floor. Someone will meet you there. Thanks, I muttered, stepping away from the desk before I could embarrass myself further. The elevator ride felt endless. Each ding announcing another floor passed felt like a countdown to something monumental or disastrous. By the time the doors slid open on the 47th floor, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Standing there to greet me was none other than Evelyn herself. She looked different today, more polished, more commanding. Gone was the vulnerability I'd glimpsed on the side of the road. In its place was the poised, confident leader I'd read about in magazines. Leo, she said, offering me a warm smile. Thank you for coming. No problem, I replied, forcing a grin. Though I gotta admit, I wasn't expecting this. Her smile widened slightly, as if she understood exactly what I meant. Come with me, she said, gesturing for me to follow her. We have a lot to discuss. And with that, she turned and walked down the hallway, leaving me no choice but to trail after her, wondering what on earth awaited me behind those closed doors. Evelyn led me through a maze of glass-walled offices and sleek conference rooms, each one more impressive than the last. People bustled around us, their faces glued to tablets or smartphones, barely sparing a glance in our direction. It was like stepping into another world, one where efficiency reigned supreme, and every detail had been meticulously designed to project power and success. Finally, we reached a pair of double doors at the end of the hallway. Evelyn pushed them open, revealing a spacious office that took my breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, while minimalist furniture created an atmosphere of understated elegance. In the center of the room stood a large mahogany desk, its surface pristine except for a single laptop and a framed photograph. "Please sit," Evelyn said, gesturing toward a chair opposite her desk. She moved with purpose, taking her own seat behind the desk before folding her hands neatly in front of her. For a moment, she simply studied me, her expression unreadable. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, feeling like I just walked into a job interview I hadn't prepared for. "So," I began hesitantly, "what's this about?" Evelyn leaned forward slightly, her piercing gaze locking onto mine. "Leo, do you believe in fate? Or coincidence?" The question caught me off guard. I don't know. Maybe both? Why?" She nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. "When I broke down on that road yesterday, I wasn't just dealing with a car problem. I was at a crossroads, in my life, in my career. And then you showed up." Her words sent a chill running down my spine. Was she implying what I thought she was implying? That somehow, fixing her car had changed her destiny? "I'm not following," I admitted, scratching the back of my neck nervously. "Are you saying you think it was meant for me to help you?" "In a way, yes," she replied, her voice softening. "But let me explain. Yesterday wasn't just any day for me. I'd come out to that road to clear my head because I've been struggling with a decision, a big one. Hartwell Industries is on the verge of launching a new initiative, something that could revolutionize the automotive industry. But it requires someone who understands mechanics, not just theoretically, but practically. Someone who knows how things work under the hood." My eyes widened as realization dawned. "Wait, are you asking me to join your company?" She smiled faintly, leaning back in her chair. "Not exactly. What I'm offering is bigger than that. Leo, I want you to lead the project, to be the face of this initiative. You'll have access to resources most people can only dream of: engineers, designers, state-of-the-art facilities. All you need to do is bring your expertise and vision to the table." I stared at her, utterly speechless. This couldn't be real. A CEO, a billionaire, was offering me a chance to step into a role I never imagined possible. Lead a project? Revolutionize the automotive industry? Me? The guy who spent his days covered in grease and fixing busted radiators? "You're serious," I managed to say after what felt like an eternity. "You really want me to do this?" "Yes," she said firmly. "And here's why. When I watched you work on my car yesterday, I saw something remarkable. Not just skill, though you clearly have that in spades. I saw passion, dedication, humility. Those qualities are rare, especially in leadership roles. And they're exactly what this project needs." "But," I faltered, shaking my head, "I'm nobody. Just a mechanic from a tiny garage. How am I supposed to lead anything? People won't take me seriously." "That's where you're wrong," Evelyn countered, her tone unwavering. "People will take you seriously because I believe in you, because I see potential in you that others might overlook. Trust me, Leo, I didn't get to where I am today by making reckless decisions. If I'm putting my faith in you, it's because I know you can rise to the occasion." Her confidence was intoxicating, but also terrifying. Could I really do this? Leave behind everything I knew and step into a world so far removed from my own? The idea was thrilling and overwhelming all at once. "What happens if I say no?" I asked quietly. Her expression softened, and for the first time since we'd entered the office, she looked almost vulnerable again. "If you say no, I'll respect your decision, but I hope you won't. Because this isn't just about me or Hartwell Industries. It's about you. About giving yourself the opportunity to grow, to prove that you're capable of more than you ever dreamed." I sat there, my mind racing. Everything inside me screamed that this was insane. that I should politely decline and go back to my normal life. But another part of me, the part that had always longed for something greater, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was my chance to change everything. For the rest of the day, I wandered the streets of the city in a daze, replaying Evelyn's offer over and over in my head. Every instinct told me to run, to retreat to the safety of my garage and pretend none of this had happened. But the seed of possibility had been planted, and I couldn't ignore it. That evening, I called Mike, needing someone to talk to. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire story, from the breakdown on the highway to Evelyn's shocking proposal. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Dude," he finally said, his voice tinged with awe, "this is huge. Like, life-changing huge. Are you gonna do it?" "I don't know," I admitted, pacing back and forth in my cramped apartment. "It sounds amazing, but what if I screw it up? What if I'm not cut out for something like this?" Mike snorted. "Come on, man. You're the smartest guy I know when it comes to cars. If anyone can pull this off, it's you. Besides, when's the last time you got an opportunity like this? Probably never." His words hit home. He was right. I'd spent years playing it safe, staying within the confines of what I knew. But deep down, I'd always wondered what lay beyond those boundaries. What if this was my shot to find out? By the time I hung up with Mike, I'd made up my mind. I'd accept Evelyn's offer, not because I was sure I could succeed, but because I owed it to myself to try. The next morning, I returned to Hartwell Tower, my heart pounding with equal parts excitement and dread. Evelyn greeted me with a knowing smile, as if she'd already guessed my decision. "I'm in," I told her, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Tell me what I need to do." Her smile widened, and for the first time, I saw genuine joy in her eyes. "Welcome aboard, Leo. Let's build something incredible together." Over the following weeks, I dove headfirst into the project. Evelyn introduced me to a team of brilliant engineers and designers, each one eager to collaborate. At first, I struggled to adapt to the corporate environment, meetings, presentations, endless emails, but slowly, I began to find my footing. With Evelyn's guidance, I learned to channel my practical knowledge into innovative ideas, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And then came the unexpected twist. One afternoon, Evelyn called me into her office. Her demeanor was unusually tense, and for the first time, I sensed that something was wrong. "Leo," she began, her voice heavy with emotion, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you from the start." My stomach dropped. "What is it?" She hesitated, then sighed deeply. The reason I was on that road that day, I wasn't just clearing my head. I was running from my past, from mistakes I made, decisions that cost people their livelihoods. I wanted to disappear, to escape the weight of responsibility. But meeting you reminded me of why I started this company in the first place, to make a difference. Her confession left me reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you deserve to know the truth," she replied. "And because I trust you. More than anyone else, I believe you can help me turn things around, not just for the company, but for the people we serve." Her vulnerability struck a chord deep within me. For the first time, I realized that Evelyn wasn't just a powerful CEO. She was human, flawed, and fragile like the rest of us. And in that moment, I vowed to stand by her side, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Under Evelyn's mentorship, I flourished. Together, we developed groundbreaking technologies that transformed the automotive industry, earning accolades and admiration from around the globe. Along the way, I discovered strengths I never knew I had, and friendships I never expected to form. But perhaps the greatest reward was watching Evelyn rediscover her passion. Through our partnership, she found redemption, proving that even the strongest among us sometimes need a helping hand. Years later, as I stood on stage accepting an award for innovation, I glanced across the room at Evelyn. She smiled proudly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. In that moment, I understood that our journey wasn't just about success. It was about connection. About two strangers finding each other in the unlikeliest of places and changing each other's lives forever. As the applause echoed around us, I whispered a silent thank you to Evelyn, to fate, and to the broken-down car that brought us together.